The Grand Stellar Assembly was a rare event in the galaxy. Representatives from over 50 species gathered aboard the massive station Celestial Nexus to negotiate peace, trade, and alliances. For Captain Elias Cade, it was another day in his unpredictable career as a diplomat. Despite his reputation as a war hero, he had reluctantly traded the battlefield for the diplomatic table, a place where battles were fought with words and strategies instead of weapons. This year's assembly had an unusual guest, Queen Xi Zara of the Carthok Dominion. Known for her ruthless rule and unmatched army, she rarely left the safety of her homeworld. Many suspected her presence was a power play, a chance to remind the galaxy that her empire remained the most feared force in existence. Cade, like many others, felt uneasy about her presence. Still, he couldn't deny his curiosity. Carthok culture was as alien as it got, rigid, hierarchical, and utterly dismissive of weaker species. For them, humanity ranked somewhere just above vermin. Cade had met Carthok envoys before, but standing in the presence of Queen Xi Zara herself was an entirely different matter. The queen arrived with her entourage, their crimson battle armor gleaming under the station's lights. Her crown, made of jagged black obsidian, seemed to drink in the light rather than reflect it. She exuded an aura of authority that made even the bravest species in the room lower their gaze. Cade, however, held his ground, his human stubbornness refusing to bow to intimidation. The conference began as expected: long speeches, thinly veiled threats, and endless posturing. Cade sat at the human delegation's table, quietly observing. He didn't trust the Carthok, not even a little. Then it happened. A flash of light and a deafening explosion shattered the air. The room plunged into chaos as the assembly hall's shields failed, and assassins emerged from hidden positions. They were cloaked figures wielding plasma blades, their movements swift and lethal. Their target was clear: Queen Xi Zara. The queen's guards reacted instantly, forming a protective circle around her. But the assassins were prepared, their weapons cutting through the elite soldiers with terrifying efficiency. Delegates from other species scrambled for cover, unwilling to risk their lives for the queen's safety. Cade, however, acted differently. Years of combat training kicked in, and he sprang into action. Grabbing a fallen guard's energy blade, he charged toward the attackers. His instincts told him this wasn't just an assassination. It was a calculated move to destabilize the galaxy's fragile balance. If the queen fell, chaos would ripple across the stars. "Stay down," Cade shouted to his delegation, his voice cutting through the chaos. The assassins didn't expect a human to intervene, let alone one with Cade's skill. He fought with precision, his blade clashing against theirs in a dazzling display of light and sparks. His movements were fluid, a dance born of countless battles. The assassins underestimated him and paid the price. Queen Xi Zara watched in disbelief as Cade cut down her attackers one by one. Despite her own combat prowess, she had never seen a human fight like this. He moved with a mix of desperation and determination, as though he believed the fate of the galaxy depended on this moment. When the last assassin fell, Cade stood panting, his uniform scorched and bloodied. The room was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the station's systems coming back online. Delegates peeked out from their hiding spots, stunned by what they had witnessed. Queen Xi Zara rose from her throne-like chair, her gaze fixed on Cade. For the first time, her imposing demeanor faltered, replaced by a flicker of something uncharacteristic: gratitude. "You saved my life," she said, her voice a low growl. Cade wiped sweat from his brow, his grip tightening on the blade. Someone had to. Couldn't let them turn this place into a bloodbath. The queen studied him, her sharp, reptilian eyes narrowing. "You are either very brave or very foolish, human." "Maybe a bit of both," Cade replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Before she could respond, her remaining guards rushed to secure the area, and medical teams arrived to tend to the wounded. The assassins' bodies were examined. their cloaks bearing insignias that hinted at an internal Karthok conspiracy. As Cade watched the chaos settle, he felt a strange sense of unease. Saving the Queen might have prevented disaster for now, but he knew this was just the beginning of something much larger. For Queen Xizara, however, the incident was transformative. Humans were considered insignificant in her empire, yet one had risked his life to save hers. Her rigid worldview had cracked, just slightly, and it unsettled her in ways she couldn't yet understand. Unbeknownst to Cade, her gratitude would soon change his life in ways he could never have imagined. The days following the assassination attempt passed in a blur. The Celestial Nexus Station was on high alert, with additional security measures put in place after the attack. The delegates from across the galaxy had finally calmed, but whispers of the assassination and Cade's heroic actions filled every corner of the station. Captain Elias Cade, however, was not interested in the attention. His thoughts were focused on one thing: the Karthok Queen. She had sent for him several times, but he had delayed their meetings, unsure of what to expect from such a powerful and dangerous ruler. The time for avoiding her, however, had run out. Cade stepped into the lavish, yet cold, throne room aboard the Celestial Nexus. Queen Xizara sat on a high chair, flanked by her bodyguards and advisors. The room was as imposing as her presence, its walls adorned with Karthok banners, dark and intimidating. Despite the beauty of the space, it felt more like a prison. Cade couldn't help but shiver under her gaze. "Captain Cade," Queen Xizara greeted, her voice a low, calculated growl. "You have earned my respect, though I still do not understand why you, a human, risked your life for mine." Cade stood tall, trying to project confidence, though inside he was uneasy. It was the right thing to do. "You may be an enemy to many, but I don't believe in letting anyone die, no matter their race or status." Xizara studied him carefully, her golden eyes never leaving his face. "That is unusual. In the Karthok Dominion, survival is for the strongest. Weakness is eradicated." She leaned forward, her tone growing sharper. "Yet you defend life, even when it's inconvenient. Why?" Cade hesitated for a moment. "Because if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to live with myself. Honor matters more than strength." The Queen's lips curled into a faint, unreadable smile. She seemed to find something amusing in his words. "Perhaps your honor is what saved me, but it is also what binds you to your weakness." Before Cade could respond, the room fell silent as Xizara gestured for one of her guards to approach. The guard presented a small, ornate box, and Xizara placed it on the table in front of Cade. He raised an eyebrow, unsure of what to make of the gesture. "You are a rare human," she said, "and so I offer you a gift, to honor your courage." Cade looked at the box with suspicion. What did a Karthok queen consider a gift? He was prepared for something expensive or ceremonial, but what came next shocked him beyond measure. Xizara opened the box to reveal a small, intricately designed collar and a set of chains. It wasn't the object itself that caught Cade's attention, but the context behind it. The collar was far too delicate to be used as an accessory. It was designed for something, or someone, far more important. The Queen's next words hit him like a cold slap. "I offer you my daughter, Zvalin. She is a troublesome child, and her rebellious nature has been a thorn in my side for too long. She will be your responsibility now." Cade stared at her, completely dumbfounded. "Wait, what?" Xizara's gaze was cold as ice. "You will take her with you as a token of my gratitude. The bond between you and her will form a powerful alliance. I trust you understand the value of this gift." At first, Cade thought he had misheard. "You want me to take your daughter as a gift?" Xizara's expression didn't change. "Yes, she is a symbol of my authority, and by taking her, you will solidify your position. In the eyes of my enemies, this gesture will be seen as a mark of great honor, and perhaps you can teach her the value of loyalty." Cade shook his head, his mind racing. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. Giving away a princess as a gift was unheard of, even in the galaxy's strangest cultures. But the Karthok were different, and their ways were often difficult to understand. This is not what I had in mind when I saved your life, Cade muttered, his voice filled with disbelief. Thyzura's eyes narrowed, her voice becoming colder. You have no choice, Captain. My gift is a gesture of power. You will accept it, or we will have problems. Understand? Despite his shock, Cade tried to regain control of the situation. I'm not sure I can accept this. I didn't save your life to become a jailer. The Queen's lip curled into a sneer. You will accept it, or you will face the consequences. Valen's future is in your hands now. As if on cue, the doors to the throne room opened, and in walked a tall, fierce-looking woman. She wore the same regal armor as her mother, but her posture was defiant and her expression rebellious. Valen, the Karthok princess, stepped forward, her sharp eyes locking with Cade's. You must be the human who saved my mother's life, Valen said, her voice cold and distant. I suppose I owe you something, though I'm not sure what it is. Cade could only stare. The woman before him was everything her mother had described, powerful, strong, and utterly unafraid. But the look in her eyes showed something more. She was angry. Angry at being handed over like this. You're the gift, Cade asked, his voice softening with confusion and concern. Valen didn't answer. Instead, she turned to her mother, bowing her head slightly, as though resigned to her fate. It seems I have no choice. Cade's mind raced as the weight of what had just happened sank in. He had just been handed a rebellious alien princess, and it was unclear what this gift would mean for his future and for the galaxy. Captain Elias Cade spent the next few days adjusting to the unexpected situation. He had never imagined that saving the life of a ruthless Karthok queen would result in being handed the queen's rebellious daughter as a gift. But here he was, aboard his ship Dauntless, with Princess Valen, the fiery, strong-willed daughter of Queen Xizora, assigned to his care. Valen had made it clear from the start that she wasn't pleased with this arrangement. She was a princess of the Karthok Dominion, and being sent away to a human ship was the last thing she wanted. As far as she was concerned, she had been thrown away like a piece of unwanted property, and Cade was the last person she wanted to answer to. The first few days were filled with tension. Valen refused to follow any of Cade's orders and spent most of her time in her quarters, brooding. Cade tried to approach her once or twice, offering a gesture of understanding. But each time she shot him down with cold words or harsh glares. She refused to speak to him beyond the bare minimum, and her anger was almost palpable. It wasn't just the situation she hated, it was the idea of being under the control of someone she considered inferior. The Karthok were a proud, powerful species, and to be handed over to a human, who they considered weak and insignificant, was an insult. Cade, on the other hand, struggled to understand her resentment. He had fought on countless battlefields for peace, had brokered numerous treaties, and had done his best to treat everyone with respect, regardless of their species. But he quickly realized that Valen wasn't like the diplomats he was used to. He made an effort to keep things professional, but it was clear that the cultural differences between them were vast. Humans valued cooperation and understanding, but the Karthok valued power and submission. Valen couldn't wrap her mind around the idea that a human, someone so weak in her eyes, could offer her anything of value. Why are you wasting your time, human? Valen's voice was sharp as she stared at him from across the table. You can't possibly understand my people. You can't even begin to grasp the weight of what it means to be Karthok. Cade sighed, rubbing his temples. He had tried to keep things civil, but every conversation seemed to end with her insulting him or the human race. It was starting to get under his skin. Look, Valen, I don't need to understand everything about your people to see that you're angry, and I'm not here to change your culture, but I am here to help keep you safe. She laughed bitterly. Safe? From what? Your weakness. My mother sent me here because she thinks I'm a problem. She thinks that I'll somehow learn from you, but I won't. You're nothing compared to her. You're nothing compared to the Karthok." Cade's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. He could feel his patience wearing thin, but he knew getting angry wouldn't help. "I'm not here to prove anything. I'm here because I was asked to take care of you, temporarily. And I don't care what your mother thinks about it. I'm not your enemy." Valen shot him a look that could have burned through steel. "I don't need anyone's protection. Least of all, a human's." Cade stood up and walked over to the viewport, staring out into the vast expanse of space. "You're a prisoner, Valen. No matter how you look at it, your mother's actions have consequences. If you want to stay safe, you're going to have to learn how to work with me. I don't expect you to like it, but I do expect you to try." Valen's eyes narrowed as she stood up from her chair. "I don't need protection, and I don't need your help." Cade turned around slowly. "You might think you don't, but the galaxy isn't as forgiving as you think. You can't just fight your way out of every situation. I've done just fine without anyone's help." She shot back, her voice filled with pride. "I've survived the Karthok court. I've survived my mother. I'll survive you too." Cade sighed. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you." For the next few days, Valen continued her defiant silence. She refused to leave her quarters, spending most of her time reading Karthok history and refusing to engage with Cade or anyone else on the ship. Meanwhile, Cade spent his time working on the diplomatic reports, occasionally checking in on her progress, though he didn't push her too hard. He understood that she was dealing with a lot, being forced to leave her home and her people, to be handed over as a symbol of her mother's power to someone she considered beneath her. Despite their differences, Cade's patience began to slowly wear down Valen's defenses. There were moments when he caught her looking at him with a different expression, not just disdain, but something that hinted at curiosity. One evening, Cade found her standing by the ship's observatory window, staring at the stars. Her posture had softened slightly. "You're staring at the stars," Cade said, his voice calm. "Something on your mind?" Valen turned slightly, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "I never imagined I'd end up here, among humans." Cade leaned against the doorway, watching her. "No one ever imagines where they'll end up, but sometimes life has a way of surprising you." For the first time, Valen said nothing in response. Instead, she looked out at the stars again, her expression unreadable. Cade couldn't tell if the conversation had made a difference, but at least she hadn't snapped at him this time. It was a small step, but it was a step nonetheless. Maybe, just maybe, things could change. The peace aboard Dauntless didn't last long. Tensions were still high between Captain Elias Cade and Princess Valen, but something more dangerous was brewing in the shadows. As the days passed, reports began to arrive about mysterious Karthok ships lurking near their route. Ships that had no clear reason to be there. Cade wasn't one to believe in coincidences, and his instincts told him this was more than just a random encounter. One evening, while studying a map of the sector, Cade received a private message from his intelligence officer, Lieutenant Hannah Jax. "Captain, you need to see this." Hannah's voice crackled over the comm. Cade quickly responded. "What's going on, Lieutenant?" "It's about the Karthok ships we've been tracking. They're not just random patrols. They're part of something bigger. I believe we've stumbled upon a conspiracy, something inside the Karthok Dominion. It could be linked to the assassination attempt on Queen Xizara." Cade frowned, his thoughts instantly turning to the previous attack. "Who's behind it?" "I don't have all the details yet, but the ships we've spotted are Karthok elite, high-ranking military officers. This could be an internal power struggle." Hannah replied, her tone grave. Cade's mind raced. A power struggle within the Karthok. That meant things were about to get much more complicated. He had thought the attack on the Queen was an isolated incident, but now he realized it was part of something much larger. "I'll need to speak with Valen," Cade muttered. As if on cue, Valen walked into the room, her arms crossed, her face set in its usual defiant expression. "I assume you've seen the reports, human. You think this is all a coincidence?" Cade nodded, gesturing for her to sit down. "No, it's not a coincidence. I believe there's a conspiracy within your mother's empire. People are trying to undermine her." Valen's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Cade saw something more than the usual hostility in her gaze. "You don't think I know that?" she asked, her voice low. "My mother's rule is full of enemies. Enemies within her own ranks. There are always whispers in the halls of the palace. But why would you care?" Cade met her gaze steadily. "Because if your mother falls, the chaos will spill out across the galaxy. Your people might tear each other apart. And that could affect all of us, not just the Karthok." Valen stood up abruptly, pacing the room as she spoke. "My mother isn't the problem. It's the people who want her power, those who think they can do a better job than her. You think they'll stop with her? No, they'll destroy everything. I've seen it happen before." Cade's mind raced. Was Valen speaking from experience? Had she seen this kind of betrayal firsthand? He needed to understand more. "How do you know so much about this?" Valen paused, her eyes flickering with a mix of anger and resignation. "Because I've grown up with it. I've seen the lies, the manipulation. My mother is ruthless, yes, but she is not the only one with blood on her hands. If this conspiracy is what I think it is, it's only the beginning. The people behind it will do whatever it takes to seize power." Cade had no doubt that Valen wasn't just speaking as a daughter, but as someone who had lived through the harsh realities of Karthok politics. She knew the game better than most, and she wasn't afraid to call it for what it was. "I'll need your help," Cade said quietly. Valen turned to him, her expression unreadable. "What kind of help do you expect from me, human? I can't fight this battle alone. We need to understand who is behind this and why. I'm not asking you to fight with me. I'm asking you to help me figure out what's going on within your mother's court." For a long moment, Valen said nothing. Then, finally, she spoke. "I hate my mother's rule. But I also hate the idea of seeing the Karthok fall apart. I won't fight for her, but if you're truly serious about stopping this, I'll help you." Cade nodded, relieved to have her support, even if it was tentative. They weren't allies by choice, but by necessity. Valen was still distrustful, but she knew the stakes, and that gave Cade hope. Together, they began to plan. Cade contacted Lieutenant Hannah Jax and shared what he had learned from Valen. Hannah quickly analyzed the information, confirming that the Karthok ships had been engaging in covert activities, likely to stir up conflict within the Empire. Their mission was clear. They had to stop the conspirators before they caused irreparable damage to the fragile peace in the galaxy. Over the next few days, Cade and Valen worked together, sifting through intel and reports, piecing together a web of connections and hidden motives. It wasn't easy. Valen was still reluctant to fully trust Cade, and the Karthok's methods of communication and deception were vastly different from those Cade was used to. But bit by bit, they uncovered a plot that stretched deep into the Karthok military. The conspirators were planning something massive, an uprising. They aimed to overthrow Queen Xi Zara and replace her with someone who would lead the Karthok with an iron fist, one who believed in total dominance over other species. This was no longer about a simple assassination. It was about the future of the entire empire. As Cade sat in his command chair, staring at the star map, he felt a cold chill run through him. The stakes had just gotten higher. If they didn't stop this in time, it could mean the end of any hope for peace in the galaxy. And worse, it might mean the end of Valen's future as well. The tension on Dauntless was thicker than ever. Cade and Valen had started to form an uneasy alliance, but the weight of their mission hung over them like a storm cloud. Every day, the conspirators in the Karthok Dominion grew bolder, and their plan to overthrow Queen Xi Zara seemed more and more inevitable. Time was running out. The intel was becoming clearer. The leader of the rebellion within the Karthok ranks was a high-ranking general named Varrock, a ruthless tactician who had gained a loyal following among the more extreme factions of the Dominion. He was known for his cold efficiency and his belief that the Karthok should dominate every race they encountered. No compromise, no mercy. And now, it seemed, he was ready to take his beliefs to the extreme by ousting Xizara and taking control. "We need to stop him before he strikes," Cade said, staring at the data that Hannah Jax had gathered. "Varrock is planning something big, something that could tear apart the entire Karthok fleet." Valen stood by the window, her arms crossed, staring out at the stars. "I've heard his name before," she said quietly, as if the words weighed heavily on her. "Varrock is not someone to be taken lightly. He's a monster, but he has followers. Loyal ones. They'll do anything for him." Cade knew this wouldn't be easy. The Karthok military was powerful, and Varrock was a leader who inspired fear in even the most seasoned warriors. But Cade wasn't about to back down, not when the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. "We can't let him succeed," Cade said firmly. "If we don't stop this, the Karthok will plunge into a war that will affect everyone." "And Valen," he paused, looking at her, "you can't afford to let your mother fall. If Varrock takes over, everything you've known will be destroyed." Valen turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "I'm aware. My mother's rule is harsh, but it's all I've known. If Varrock takes power, he'll bring ruin, not only to the Karthok, but to everyone else too. His vision is madness." Cade could see the conflict in her eyes. She was caught between her loyalty to her people and her understanding of what was at stake. She didn't want to see her mother's empire fall, but the price of stopping Varrock might be more than she was willing to pay. "We need to get to Varrock before he makes his move," Cade said, tapping the map on the console. "We know he's planning a strike against the capital, but we don't know when or where." Valen stepped forward. "There's something you don't understand, human," she said, her voice low and cold. "The Karthok court is full of traitors, people who would sell their own mothers for power. Even if we find Varrock, we may have more enemies in the shadows than we can handle. It's not just about stopping him. It's about surviving what comes after." Cade met her gaze. "Then we'll have to be ready for everything." That night, the crew of Dauntless prepared for the worst. The intelligence reports indicated that Varrock's forces were moving, gathering outside the Karthok capital. It was only a matter of time before he made his move, and Cade knew they had to act fast. The next day, as they neared the outer edges of Karthok space, things took an unexpected turn. "Captain," Hannah's voice came over the comm, urgent and strained. "We've intercepted a communication. Varrock's fleet is on the move, but it's not where we thought. It's a trap." Cade's heart sank. "What do you mean, a trap?" "There's been a double cross," Hannah said. "Some of the Karthok ships loyal to the Queen have turned. They've allied with Varrock. He's not just attacking the capital. He's already inside." Valen's face went pale. "No," she whispered. "No, this can't be happening. My mother," her voice faltered, and for a moment, Cade saw the raw emotion in her eyes. This wasn't just about politics for her. This was her family, her mother, who was now at risk of losing everything. "We need to act now," Cade said, his voice firm. "Prepare the crew for battle. We're going in." But Valen shook her head, her voice shaking with emotion. "I can't just sit here, Captain. I need to be there. I need to warn my mother." Cade hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "You're coming with us, but stay behind me. We don't know who to trust anymore. Everyone could be a traitor." Valen's eyes flashed with a mix of anger and determination. "I won't hide behind you. I'll do whatever it takes to save my people." Cade knew better than to argue. Valen was no ordinary princess. She was a warrior, a product of the brutal Karthok culture. He could see that she was willing to risk everything to save her people, even if it meant defying her own mother. The Dauntless made its approach toward the Karthok capital, now in the midst of chaos. A battle raged in orbit as Varrock's ships clashed with those loyal to Queen Xizera. But as Cade and Zvalin prepared to join the fight, an unsettling feeling lingered in the air. Something didn't feel right. Suddenly, the comms crackled. "Captain Cade, we've been betrayed." It was Hannah. "One of the officers on board has been working for Varrock this whole time. We've been set up." Cade's stomach dropped. The betrayal was deeper than he had ever imagined. "Get ready, Zvalin," Cade said. "This isn't just a fight for your mother's throne anymore. It's a fight for survival." And as the Dauntless rushed toward the battlefield, Cade couldn't shake the feeling that this war would change everything. Forever. The battle outside the Karthok capital was chaos incarnate. The dark expanse of space was filled with the flashing lights of energy weapons, the thunderous explosions of colliding ships, and the unsettling hum of war. Captain Elias Cade stood at the helm of Dauntless, watching as the massive Karthok ships engaged in a brutal struggle, each side desperately fighting for control. Varrock's betrayal had shaken everything, and now it was a race against time to stop him before the Karthok dominion tore itself apart. Zvalin stood beside him, her jaw clenched, her eyes never leaving the battlefield. There was no time for fear, no time for hesitation. This wasn't just a mission anymore, it was personal. Her mother's empire was under threat, and the woman who had once been an unstoppable force now seemed to be on the brink of losing everything. "I never thought it would come to this," Zvalin said, her voice barely above a whisper, as she stared at the flashing lights of the fight. "My mother, she trusted Varrock. She didn't see the betrayal coming." Cade glanced at her, seeing the pain in her eyes. It wasn't just the threat to her mother's throne that troubled her. It was the betrayal of someone her mother had trusted, someone who had used that trust to destroy everything. "We'll stop him," Cade said, his voice firm. "We just need to keep pushing forward." But Zvalin didn't look convinced. "I hope you're right, Captain. But even if we win today, the damage will have been done. The Karthok are a broken empire, and I fear we'll never put the pieces back together." Before Cade could respond, a new alert sounded across the bridge, pulling him back to the immediate threat. Dauntless was within striking distance of the Karthok capital, but something wasn't right. A signal from their intel officer, Lieutenant Hannah Jax, appeared on his screen, flashing urgent. "Captain, we've got a serious problem." Hannah's voice came through the comms. "There's a traitor on board. I've confirmed that one of our own officers is working with Varrock. We need to act now before they sabotage everything." Cade's stomach dropped. The traitor they had been chasing had finally been uncovered, but now it was a race to stop them before they could do any more damage. "Who is it?" Cade asked, his mind already racing through the possible suspects. Hannah paused. "It's Commander Eric Thorne. He's been leaking information to Varrock for weeks. He was the one who gave us the wrong coordinates, leading us straight into Varrock's trap. He's aboard the ship, and he's planning something big." Zvalin's eyes widened in shock. "Eric Thorne. I know him. He's one of the top commanders. How could he betray us like this?" "Everyone has a price," Cade replied grimly. "And it looks like Thorne's price was power. We need to take him out of the equation before it's too late." With no time to waste, Cade issued orders to the crew. "Prepare to board the Karthok capital. We need to shut down Varrock's forces from the inside. Get us as close to the enemy ships as possible." Zvalin turned to him. "What about Thorne? How do we stop him?" "We'll deal with him once we've secured the area," Cade said, his voice steady. "I can't afford to let him disrupt our plans now." As Dauntless closed in on the capital, the tension grew unbearable. The ship shook under the weight of the ongoing battle. But Cade stayed focused, his mind working through every possible scenario. They needed to strike hard and fast, using the element of surprise to their advantage. "We've got incoming fire," the navigator called out. "Shields holding, but they won't last long." "Damn it," Cade muttered. Hannah, you have a visual on Thorn. Not yet, sir. But I've traced his last known location. He's in the command center. We'll need to move quickly to prevent any further sabotage. Cade nodded, his jaw tightening. Let's move. The crew sprang into action, ready to follow Cade's orders. Valen, despite her earlier hesitation, stood tall, ready to fight alongside them. She had come a long way since she had first boarded Dauntless. What started as an unwilling alliance had turned into a true partnership. She had seen the value of working together, and now, more than ever, her strength and determination were vital to the mission. As they boarded the Karthok capital's docking bay, Cade and Valen led a small team toward the command center. The halls were eerily quiet, and Cade's instincts told him that they were walking into a trap. But they had no choice. They couldn't let Thorn and Verrock gain any more ground. The command center doors hissed open, revealing a tense scene. Commander Thorn stood in front of a bank of consoles, working furiously to reroute the Karthok fleet's coordinates. Thorn. Cade's voice rang out, filled with authority. Stop what you're doing. Thorn turned, a cruel smirk spreading across his face. Ah, Captain Cade. I was wondering when you'd finally catch on. It's too late. Verrock has already won. Valen stepped forward, her eyes flashing with fury. You'll regret this, Thorn. Betraying my mother was the last mistake you'll ever make. Thorn's expression darkened. You think you can stop us? Verrock will crush you all. The tension in the room was palpable as Cade and his team advanced. Thorn had made his choice, and now he would face the consequences. We'll see about that, Cade said, as he motioned for his crew to move in. The battle for the capital had begun, but it was clear that it wouldn't be just about fighting Verrock's forces. It was about trusting the right people, dealing with betrayal, and finding a way to survive the storm of chaos that was quickly swallowing everything around them. The command center was chaotic. The hum of alarms filled the air, and the flashing lights added to the tension that gripped every person in the room. Commander Eric Thorn stood at the console, his eyes fixed on the data streaming across the screen, his hands moving swiftly to reroute the capital's defenses to Verrock's forces. He had already made his choice, and there was no turning back for him now. But Cade and his team had no intention of letting him succeed. Thorn, Cade shouted, stepping forward. It's over. You're done. You won't get away with this. Thorn smirked, the arrogance in his eyes making it clear that he thought he had already won. You think you can stop me? Verrock is already in control. Your little ship is nothing compared to the power that's about to rise. Valen stepped beside Cade, her face hard as stone. You were always a fool, Thorn. You never understood the true cost of betrayal. My mother won't let someone like you destroy her empire. Your mother. Thorn laughed bitterly. Your mother is weak. She won't be able to stop what's coming. Not even you, Princess. The room was charged with hostility, but Cade's focus was unwavering. He knew they had only one chance to stop this, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. We have to take him down now, Cade said to his team, his voice sharp. He motioned to his crew, signaling them to move in. As the soldiers spread out, Thorn's smirk faded. He had realized, too late, that his plans were falling apart. In a flash, Cade's team surged forward, aiming to disable the system Thorn was trying to control. The tension in the room was unbearable. The sound of rapid footsteps and the hiss of the door locking down filling the space. Thorn grabbed a weapon from a nearby console, his eyes blazing with desperation. Do you think I'll just let you take everything from me? He spat, pointing the weapon at Cade. Valen didn't flinch. You've already lost, Thorn. There's no going back now. Before Thorn could react, one of Cade's soldiers lunged at him, knocking the weapon from his hand. Thorn struggled, but the soldiers were quick to subdue him, pinning him to the ground. The traitor was caught. Finally, after weeks of sabotage and deception, Cade stepped forward, looking down at the man who had almost destroyed everything. You're done, Thorn. You'll never see the power you craved. This ends here. Thorn snarled, but his resistance had crumbled. Cade turned to his team. Lock him up. We'll deal with him later. Valen watched as Thorn was dragged away. The relief on her face was hard to hide, but there was something more in her eyes, something that had changed over the course of their journey. The weight of her mother's empire, the uncertainty of what would come next, had begun to weigh heavily on her. She was no longer just a princess. She had become something more. A leader. We've got more pressing matters, Cade said, his voice low as he turned back to the console. Varrock still has control of the fleet. We need to shut down his forces before it's too late. Valen nodded, her determination returning. Then let's end this. The battle outside the Carthage capital was still raging, but Cade and Valen had a plan. They had learned enough to know that Varrock wasn't going to just give up. The time for diplomacy had passed. Now it was all about action. With Thorn out of the picture, Cade and Valen, along with their trusted crew, began to work swiftly. They accessed the communication channels, sending out a signal to the Carthage fleet, ordering them to stand down and return to their loyal commanders. The message was direct and clear. Varrock's rebellion had failed. We're sending the fleet a new command, Hannah Jack said, her fingers flying over the controls. They'll be able to override Varrock's orders. It's a risky move, but it's our best shot. Do it, Cade ordered, his voice steady. The minutes dragged by like hours as the message transmitted across the galaxy. Cade couldn't afford to waste any time. If Varrock's forces didn't receive the order soon, they would destroy everything in their path. Finally, the signal went through. This is it, Hannah said, glancing at Cade. We've got a window. Varrock's fleet is pulling back. A loud cheer erupted from the crew, but Cade remained focused. They had won the battle, but the war wasn't over yet. They had to ensure that the Carthage dominion didn't collapse under the pressure. Valen turned to him, her expression softer now, a silent understanding passing between them. We've stopped the immediate threat, Cade said, his tone quiet but resolute. But there's still a lot of work to do. The Carthage need leadership. Your mother, if she can take back control, needs to stabilize the empire. Valen looked at him, the weight of the future heavy on her shoulders. I know, but this victory, it's a start. We've turned the tide. Cade nodded. And you've earned your place in this fight, Valen. No matter what happens next, you're no longer just a princess. You're a leader. She met his gaze, a spark of hope finally returning to her eyes. We're in this together now. As Dauntless pulled away from the capital, the battle behind them slowly fading into the distance, there was a new understanding between them. They had faced down impossible odds, and they had won. But the future remained uncertain, and there was still much to be done. For now, they had secured the peace, but in the galaxy, peace was always fragile, and they both knew that the next challenge was always waiting just around the corner.